Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to Smart City Kids Executive Function and Mental Health Workshop with Dr. Evan Flamenbaum. My name is Erica Papier and I am an advisor at Smart City Kids. I am also the parent of an 8th grade girl and a 4th grade boy. So I would like to briefly introduce Smart City Kids so you know we're here if you ever need us. For over 20 years now, Smart City Kids advisors have guided parents and students through the admissions process for entrance into all grades, starting with the little ones in nursery school and continuing all the way through college admission, and that includes boarding school and special education. We work with families throughout the New York area, as well as across the globe for families who are relocating. Smart City Kids also has clients that are schools and corporations, and we provide guidance around parenting, education, and admissions. We also support corporations when they are recruiting new talent by helping to find schools for the relocating families. Our advisors also offer parenting sessions where we discuss parenting and education-related topics. We also have an extraordinary group of highly experienced tutors who support students of any age and ability if your child is ever in need of extra help. I am honored to have the opportunity to introduce you to my very impressive and knowledgeable colleague, Dr. Evan Flamenbaum. Dr. Flamenbaum is an advocate for children, adolescents, and young adults who experience mental health and academic issues. He holds a doctorate in clinical social work, as well as an MA in school counseling. As a former dean of students at a prestigious private school, he used his clinical knowledge to help students stay in school during periods of difficult psychological adjustment. And as the current head of School of Academics West and co-founder of Therapy West, Dr. Flamenbaum continues to integrate his clinical knowledge and background in education to train and guide professionals and parents. He is a nationally recognized lecturer and considered an expert on the treatment of learning issues and ADHD. He also co-created Clinically Informed Academics, a research-based model that provides a framework to improve the overall functioning of students socially, emotionally, and educationally. So Dr. Flamenbaum will present for around 45 minutes, and then we will leave time for questions. So you can put your questions in the chat and I will pose them at the end. And I also wanted to share that Smart City Tutors is offering a promotion to parents who attend. Sounds like someone's playing the piano. Just make sure that everyone can mute themselves, although the practice does sound lovely.
I like the background.
Mute the participants. So as I was saying, I'm happy to share that Smart City Tutors is offering a promotion to parents who attend the workshop this evening. We are happy to provide a discount on a package of 4 executive function tutoring sessions. So if you're interested, you can email me. I will put my email in the chat. So thank you all for taking time out of your busy evening to attend our workshop. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Flamenbaum. The floor is yours. Oh, and you're on mute.
Whoops, I was on mute. I had to take the lens cap off, right?
Right.
I wanted to thank Smart City Kids for hosting this and doing such a great job advocating for your clients. And I just want to say for a few words why this topic is important, and it's particularly important and timely in the context of the pandemic. I got very interested in understanding sort of the importance of executive functioning and its relationship to mental health.
What's that?
Oh,
I think we have some people, unfortunately, we need people to mute themselves.
Yeah, if you can mute, but it takes a lot of executive functioning to manage your kids and mute things. So executive functioning is kind of like the foundational set of skills we all need to handle our lives. to handle school, to handle work, to handle our relationships. It's sort of the tread on the tire that allows us to get traction. And it's so critical, but yet so sort of misunderstood. And especially mental health professionals are poorly trained on understanding how to remediate it. Sort of whose job is it to remediate executive functioning? Certainly there are some skilled tutors and learning specialists, but I think it's really important for parents to understand the role they can play, as well as mental health clinicians who really, they understand what it is a lot, but they don't necessarily know what to do about it. So Liz, I'm going to go to slide about my day because I like to have a captive audience to vent my issues to. So just my day today, got up about 6. Usually my 20 to 30 minute sort of coffee, watch the news time was absolutely shattered by my junior, my daughter who's a junior at Mamaroneck High School. And she was stressed out about a physics test. So all of a sudden at 6:20, I'm doing physics. Showered, changed, actually remembered it was garbage day, took that out, got to the train station, not that many spots, that took a little longer, got on the train, pulled up my e-ticket. While the e-ticket was coming up, my phone rang. It was one of my staff having a major problem. We're working on that. Get off, took the local train, took the express train, then the local train, had to do 100 other things, got up my Starbucks app so I could pick up Starbucks and be on time for my 8:20 meeting. Life is a real executive functioning puzzle. We have to manage our time, prioritizing, making decisions, regulating our emotions when that staff member is, freaking out about something, and I have to regulate myself to regulate them, shifting my attention to what's important and all the things going on. So we have a lot of demand as adults, certainly as parents. Think about our kids. Think about the 6th grader, I'm going to call him Kevin, because that's my vague way of just masking Evan, who when I was a kid, I was an executive functioning nightmare. Kid gets up, gets ready to leave his house at 7 o'clock, walks out the door, remembers he forgot to take the bag with the plates in it for the school birthday party, runs out, actually misses the bus that was waiting for him, gets to school all freaked out. It's 10 o'clock, he's in ELA and they're doing something. The teacher said, please respond to what's on the board. And he's thinking, wait, that's a whole bunch of steps. I don't know how to do that. I'm panicking. Makes it to lunch where he thinks he's, safe, and he's sitting with his friends, speaking too loudly, maybe not paying attention to the lunch monitor who's glaring at him, doesn't even realize his friends are kind of annoyed with him. Goes to soccer practice at 3, has trouble remembering all the rules, just knows he's got to kick the ball hard, kicks it into the wrong net. Executive dysfunction can really, really get people of all ages, and it's our job to kind of support them on the development of those skills. So, Liz, let's go to the slide where we define. If I don't know who that is, but if everybody could just mute it, maybe. I don't know if we have the ability to just cross the board mute it, because my distraction. We're going to talk about why I'm distracted now. That noise actually takes up some of my working memory. So working memory, which many of you might have heard about or seen in reports, working memory is just our sort of mental desktop it's like our mental Post-its where we put things temporarily so we can store them long term. So think about it as your hands. We can only hold a certain amount of objects. You put too many in there and they fall out. So certain things really fit in our hands well. So, we're all adults. Think about your phone number when you were, 8 years old, 772-3643. We've stored those nice tidbits in long-term memory. But if it doesn't make it to your hands, it won't make it into our filing cabinet, and you just haven't learned. So we're going to talk about why that's so important. Mental flexibility is really, really an important aspect of executive functioning. This is about being flexible in the moment, reading all the verbal and non-verbal clues that fly at us all day. We're always responding based on input, and this is the job of executive functioning, to sort of regulate our emotions and our attention. Attention's like a flashlight. You You have to have the ability to turn it on when you want to turn it on and shine it where you want to shine it. And then self-control, thinking into the future, which is really hard for a lot of kids. Delaying gratification and managing your frustration tolerance. Many of us remember if you took Psych 101, the marshmallow test, which I certainly would have failed. But even as adults, we have to take our turn at a meeting. We have to be socially reciprocal. We have to wait for things. Friendship at all ages requires a lot of executive functioning. I meet a lot of kids, middle, lower school, upper school, even college kids. They're great at making friends. They're not so great at keeping friends, which is such a big part of life. And sort of understanding as they get older that successful people do things in spite of them. Nobody likes to train for the marathon. That's awful to run 4 hours every morning in the cold, but they like to say they ran a marathon. And I think it takes a tremendous amount of development for people to be able to delay that kind of gratification. So these are sort of categorically my three facets of executive functioning. When I think about it, there's 1,000 different definitions, but it's really all the processes that help us plan and navigate our world. So let's go to the next slide, Liz. So again, this is not an exhaustive list. I kind of, a wonderful analogy of executive functioning I once heard is that there's an orchestra, and these are sort of the sections of the orchestra as I see them. And then you need a conductor. I meet a lot of people with wonderful orchestras, but they have, the conductor has issues. They're not really making music. They're not able to coordinate all these different processes. So those of you who are parents or anybody working with a kid, you have to sort of say to yourself, what part of the orchestra is the conductor, need to focus on? Because as children grow, they practice executive functioning skills as part of their social play activities, whether it's formal play like a board game or just imaginary play. All of that stuff requires a lot of executive functioning. It's really meant to develop executive functioning. So typically by like ages 5 through 12, as you're sort of, entering elementary age to the cusp of middle school, kids begin to take on greater responsibilities at home. They're setting the table, they're making their own lunch, they're, putting away some of their stuff, they have chores. During these activities, parents, teachers, and caregivers really need to provide the opportunity for kids to practice executive functioning skills and positively reinforce them. You see your kid, put that thing away or do something on their own, you have to praise it. We really want to shape that development. We really want to develop that sense of motivation to do that. So by the time we're dealing with teenagers, I have a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old, even young adults. We've all had a lot of experience in developing these skills. Of course, we know some kids in this age group are way behind in the need of additional support. And I would say the pandemic has really pervasively across the board, whether you had learning problems, any sort of mental health issues, both or none, I really saw a backsliding of executive functioning. And I just took my kid to freshman year in college. And, one of the things I'm noticing about freshmen in college is that, you have these 18, 19-year-olds entering, and some are more like 17, some are 18, some are like more like somewhere in end of sophomore year. This is really spread out, this kind of developmental trajectory. So again, we assume that these skills are ultimately internalized, but that's not always true. People who have kids who do have some learning weaknesses. So my son went to Windward. He's dyslexic, and Windward did a wonderful job. But one of the things they said to me early on is, although your kid looks really old, and he does, he's 6'6" now. He's always looked older. You got to think of him 3 or 4 years behind in certain developmental processes. And really what that means is certain aspects of executive functioning we got to know our kids and know where they are and not demanding of them things that they can't do. At the same time, we need to know when to reduce the scaffolding. And sometimes it's hard for parents to know. And sometimes that really requires some professional involvement. I meet so many parents that are so relieved. I'm like, I know he's 17, but in certain areas, while we intervene, you're going to think of them more like they're 14. It's like, okay, so I'm doing the right thing. And I completely understand that. Next slide, Liz. So the pandemic, these are just sort of like from my experience anecdotally from other people, but what we've seen at Academics West, I run a therapeutic day school. This was like, watching this was fascinating and scary because Kids who were potty trained, no longer potty trained. Kids who didn't baby talk kind of took a few steps back and were talking in a more infantile way. You know, the 8-year-old that was really regulated, not sitting still. We saw a lot of kids with developmental issues like on the spectrum who worked so hard on certain areas like speech gains or whatever skills they were working at. They just didn't have access to the sport, and they really regressed a lot. Even your very neurotypical high-functioning kid at Scarsdale High School, all of a sudden is starting to have less self-regulation. They're more angry, they're more moody. We saw a lot of, you know, just talking to schools out there, some of the top tier private schools, even in the city, like our kids are procrastinating. There's like this malaise going on. There's sort of this muting of the sharpness of their executive functioning. And again, we need to know the difference between what's normal and not normal with regression. And research continues to come out on this, but first of all, regression is part of all of us as parents. We saw every time our kids had to learn a new thing, how to walk, how to read, how to do all those basic things, they tend to fall, you know, they take a few steps back, they might regress, we support them, and then they move forward. When you see it not moving forward with support, that's when we really need to do something. The research is really clear, though, that executive functioning skills can really positively impact early literacy and math skills. And this just came out in March. This is like what they call the nation's report card from the government, the National Center for Education Statistics. I did not memorize that. I am reading it. But they provide data on long-term trends in math and reading, and they just did a sort of like a special sort of round of assessment out of the normal cycle because they really wanted to know what was going on right now. This has been given since I think the early 70s. So they took their 9-year-old group of kids. They usually do like 3 or 4 data points, but they picked the 9-year-old groups in 2022. And they wanted to sort of examine their achievement during the pandemic. And what they found is that scores for reading dropped about 5 points and for math dropped about 7 points. And that's compared to 2020. So in 2 years, we had this significant reduction in core skills academically. And this is, just to give you some perspective, this is the largest average score decline in reading since 1990. So not to scare people, but I think what it really says to me on a larger kind of macro scale is we need to put more time and energy into developing academic and executive functioning skills in our kids. For example, at Academics West, we just did reading assessments with our lower school kids. We were shocked, and I'm hearing this in other schools. We actually had to hire an extra literacy person, and all of our after school programming went from some of the fun stuff to like, hey, we're gonna have book club. We're gonna start, how can we do more literacy work? We all have to make up some time. So Liz, let's go to the slide about, we don't need to get into the substance use so much, but executive functioning is it's like a chicken and the egg. You know, kids with poor executive functioning, again, you're thinking this is just high school and college kids. It's not. I want to sort of say we want to nip executive dysfunction in the bud so it doesn't get to this point. But executive functioning creates, you know, vulnerability for substance use, and substance use directly impacts one's executive functioning. And my only point to the world is, and I used to work in an intensive outpatient center consulting, whatever treatment you're going for, whether it's substance use, anxiety, depression, whatever, there needs to be attention. There needs to be a specific plan about how to remediate any areas of executive functioning weakness, because all the tutoring, all the treatment, all the support you get is so compromised. I don't want to be like hyperbolic and say it's useless. It's not, but it's vastly reduced. And if you don't deal with this underlying issue of executive dysfunction, we're asking people to do a lot without that sort of core set of skills. It's like they have a car, but the tires have no tread, is kind of the way I always conceptualize it. So next slide. Depression. One of the things I will tell you as a clinician is you never get really depressed people to make a big decision. They are cognitively typically inflexible. Their ability for goal setting, problem solving, decision making fundamental processes of
I got it to work.
Oh, hello. The other thing I want to point out, I think there's often a view that medication
I'm on the webinar.
is a panacea. It's not. And medication can do a lot. For example, depressed folks, allowing them to increase their mood, to live, more productive and less painful lives. However, it does nothing to do with focusing on executive functioning. So again, working with mood disorders, working with people who are at any level of depression, you have to include some sort of executive functioning intervention so that they can feel better faster and be able to hold themselves afloat while they're going. Most people naturally come out of depression, almost all people do, even without intervention, but we really want to help them develop some of those skills, especially memory goes down, and all this sort of rigidity about figuring out how to get out of your situation. So executive functioning is always compromised when we're dealing with depression. Obviously, in the pandemic is a great amplifier. If we saw kids of all ages, if they were somewhat depressed or prone to it, became very depressed. So things that were subclinical became really clinical, and we had to, once again, really focus on some of these core skills. So next slide. So again, without diving into this so deeply, you can juxtapose these two sort of categories or signs of EF issues and signs of depression. The bottom line is they not only they overlap, but you can see how they mutually compound each other. Being depressed caused a lot of signs of executive dysfunction, and you could see if you don't deal with the sort of right column, or I guess it's my right column, it's your right column too. If you don't deal with some of those issues, the signs of depression are going to have a trouble sort of reduced or resolving themselves naturally. So again, a lot of times when people see kids with executive dysfunction, it's actually depression, and especially young children, especially boys, it might look as agitation or anger, but it's actually depression. And again, you see typical signs of executive dysfunction. Once again, we need to integrate that into that sort of support plan so we can treat the depression, but let's not forget to treat the executive dysfunction. Next slide. Anxiety, which has been a wonderful bumper crop for the last couple of years. Actually, before the pandemic, all the research, for young people, mental health issues were really, really becoming quite a problem. Even the CDC even said high functioning kids and those overachievers, they were a vulnerable group, which is saying something. So anxiety, again, let's go back to the hands metaphor. Anxiety becomes one of the objects in your hands. So even if you look at the DSM definition, having trouble concentrating, anxiety, what we understand from the neuroscience, tends to really most impact attentional control. So again, you have kids, we have all these kids that came back after virtual learning, and there was such this rebound anxiety. Their executive functioning, and I want to say this, like, I don't think it's overstating this, that almost every kid I saw to some degree really, really had some level of anxiety that impacted their executive functioning, ability to stay focused in class. If you don't have good working memory, you can't store it. If you can't store it, you can't retrieve it, meaning anxiety impacts our ability to learn. If you don't have adequate working memory, you cannot learn. So we saw a lot of kids stressed out in school, then they would go home and try to reteach themselves all the information because class time was not learning time. So it's really, really important with stress and anxiety to be able to help kids on those sort of self-monitoring skills, on the skills to enhance their own distress tolerance so they could learn and function in school. And again, I was really trying to tell schools, we should take this in mind. Let's lower demand for a little bit. Let's let them settle in. Let's assume there's going to be anxiety. Most schools didn't do that. They wanted to go right to the status quo, which I thought was a big problem. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little about treatment, what we can do. And I'm just going to talk about what I call high utility interventions, meaning the research indicates they work and they're simple. Whether you're 9 years old or 16 years old, if I don't make this easy and effective, a kid will not do it. So that's what we're going to look at together. So let's go to the next slide, Liz. One of the things, and this comes right out of the DBT sort of manual, is paced breathing. Paced breathing, again, it's cheap, it's easy, and as long as you're alive, you're breathing, you can take this anywhere. This is, such a simple way to go from our sympathetic, which is our fight or flight response, to our parasympathetic response, which allows us to calm down and access our prefrontal cortex versus staying in your sort of monkey brain. Just getting kids to learn how to breathe. I've seen so many kids, and I teach them this, and they're having test anxiety on a test or quiz or something, and they do this for a couple of minutes. All of a sudden, the information floods back. They can do it. There's a lot we can teach young people that's so simple that you can teach as groups, any socioeconomic level. Teaching kids how to handle stress and be able to get back to that part of their brain that's in charge, our sort of control room, is really, really vital. Next slide. We're going to look at what I call the triple threat, which is, this is it. If I, get sort of abducted by aliens tomorrow and you never see me again, this is what I want you all to take away from, because it really, really changes people's lives. And I've done it for, 20 years with hundreds and hundreds of people. So let's go to the next slide, Liz. So this is, any of you took Psych 101 and you remember the Ebbinghaus retention curve? I hope you really don't. But we've done, for many decades, research on retention, like just holding on to information, how well you remember things. Your typical person, when you meet them after a class, like it's 7th grade and you just had math and I meet you at the door, most people remember about 70%. Interestingly and amazingly, a day later, 24 hours later, without any active learning or studying, people go down to 20%. That's a huge loss. What's more interesting is about 10 minutes, not at the door, but like 10 minutes later, people go up to about 80%. And then they go to 20%. And so if we can teach people actually to hold on to the 80% and not naturally sort of decline to the 20%, quadruple their retention, that is a tremendous gift. People that can remember, imagine if you all remembered 4 times what you normally did throughout your lifespan, you'd be incredibly smart. And it's true. So what the research, just to break down the research simply, is it indicates 10-24/7, which is if you look at your notes, review information, again, be age appropriate. What a 4th grader is doing is a lot different than like a junior in high school, but the same concept applies. Looking at that information 10 minutes, as close as you can, let's say, a day later and a week later, 3 exposures. If it didn't make it into your hand the first, second, or third time, it's unlikely you get to store it. And all of a sudden, when we do this with kids, when we just have them look at material in this sort of like, it's like interval training in the gym, all of a sudden they're confident, they're remembering things, they're less anxious in class, they feel good. More importantly, the day before the test, they've got it. They're already at 80%. Going from 80 to 90, 95 to get the A is a short leap. This only takes 5 minutes a day. Just review your notes. Today, I try to get kids, especially high school kids or college kids, just look at today's notes and yesterday's notes. That's all I want you to do. Find a time to do that. And it pretty much gets them there. So that's the review strategy. Preview really means, so review strategy really helps with any working memory deficit. We see a lot of kids, and I'm sure some of your kids, this about them, have slow processing. Again, that has nothing to do with intelligence. Some people just go at a different pace. So class, you're in 8th grade, class is going 100 miles an hour, and you're like built to go 60. What do? How do you take the elevator, not the stairs? How do I get you where you need to go with less time and putting in less energy? So previewing material is vital. Again, 5 minutes a day, to look at that YouTube video for 3 minutes, to look at the summary paragraph, to look at the Cliff Notes or Spark Notes or study guide, or just simply look at the textbook and look at the pictures and some of the bold words. Not deep, but it gives people hooks. We learn by sort of making associations. So this is like giving your brain hooks. So when you get to class and you're learning about mitosis, which again, I don't want you to do deeply, but something with cells dividing, and all of a sudden I started with 2 and I end up with 4. You don't need to know what interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, Pelopes, whatever it is. You don't need to know what they are, but just some hooks. All of a sudden, class time becomes learning time. People's attention doesn't slip and slide, but you can store that information. It doesn't sort of fall off the mental desktop. So to remediate processing issues, simple and easy, and a game changer for a lot of kids. And the third part, so working memory, processing, and again, performance. At the end of the day, whatever age our kids are, we want them to do well on the test, the quiz, whatever assessment is that they need to self-test. They always need to play the scrimmage before the game, because neurons that fire together wire together. And so I see a lot of kids false studying, and they're looking at their math textbook. They're looking, oh, I know how to do this. They just breeze through it. And I'm like, you cannot just look at it. You have to do the steps. You can't learn how to dance. I can anyway, just by watching a video. So when we get kids of all ages to sort of, hey, does your teacher make multiple choice tests? Yes. Well, we're going to practice on some multiple choice tests. Get on the Google Docs, find thousands of tests on whatever you want to look for. If your teacher gives true or false or short answers, we can find that, or sometimes teachers will even give it. But we always want to fire those neurons the way that they're going to be asked to be fired. And kids, it's amazing. Whenever I talk to kids, like, yeah, I kind of saw that test before. Again, even if they're stressed, they're anxious, they're low in mood, we've really created those neural networks to fire those neurons. So next slide. Given the time, I'm not going to go deeply into this, but this is just a wonderful way to conceptualize time usage. One of the areas that we see a lot of kids really impaired in is time management, even how to estimate time. It's amazing. Ask your kid, like, I have a stopwatch. Tell me when a minute's over. Some kids are like 3 minutes, 25 seconds. It can be hard. We want to get people up to this upper right quadrant where they make things important that are not urgent. This is the prioritizer. And think about it when you were in college. Who was the kid that got straight A's, was on the team, went to the clubs, you saw them out, at parties? They prioritized. They kind of started when the paper was due in 3 weeks. They went to get the books. They started making some notes. They never stressed. They were always plugging away at it. We see a lot of people make things important when they're urgent, when the fire's under your tush. That's the procrastinator. And, that's the quadrant of anxiety. And when people just make things urgent that are not important, like doing things for others more than yourself, that's the sort of quadrant of low self-esteem. And kids that do things that are not urgent, not important, they just watch too much TV, play too much Switch, Xbox, etc., to an extreme level, that's really the quadrant of depression. So I always look at time management, how people navigate the world and their time. It really has a correlation to their own mental health. And the prioritizers tend to have good relationships. They tend to be healthy, happy, well-connected. And we sort of want to do everything we can to push people that way. But for your kid or who you're working with, I always try to figure out, or have them figure out, where do you spend your time? How are we going to get you to the upper right a little more? Next slide. This is behaviorism 101, because everybody's got kids of all ages that procrastinate and don't do things. So in behaviorism, we always look at the antecedent, the thing that has to happen for the next thing to happen. What happened first? If you put cookies near me, I'm going to eat them. So you want me to eat less cookies? Hide them. So we talk about the cue or the antecedent. The way to overcome procrastination, which is avoidance, is to change one's reaction to a cue. So let's review what tends to lead one towards this typical autopilot mode of procrastination. We all just fall right into it. Think about what tends to get you on track, get you off track. How do you end up in that YouTube or TikTok rabbit hole? Does a text come in when you're working and just derail you all of a sudden? These reactions are so habitual that people, all of us, our kids, us, don't usually even know when they have started to engage in this kind of avoidance behavior. So the goal is to remove the antecedent. Leave the phone in another room. Obviously, this is obvious, but it's important to sort of operationalize it. I studied in a specific place in college. That was my cue. When I was there, I wasn't social. I, knuckled down and did my work. Because cues direct us to a place of less pain. We avoid things that are painful. You know, all of a sudden you do your math homework and you hate it. The pain center in your brain really goes on. So we have to be able to figure out ways to deal with that and tolerate it, because our natural inclination is just to avoid the pain. That's why we avoid certain behaviors. That's why you even avoid certain thoughts. And this is where we need to intervene and rewire old habits. You know, this whole, like, I had a teacher who used to always say, failing to plan is planning to fail. That annoyed the hell out of me, but it's true. The truth is, you know, you have to have a plan to develop a new ritual. This is all about ritual habit formation. Eventually changing a habit has tremendous benefits. So I used to get kids to put their thumbs like this. I'm like, do this. They're like, oh, that feels weird. I'm like, if you did this every day for a few days, a week, it starts getting normal. And it was sort of like a really good experiential example of, like, you have to tolerate that, but it's going to get normal. But how do we get to the point? How do we tolerate that? How do we make ourselves get there? Which is the reward. We want to reinforce adaptive behavior. And parents are really the main source of reinforcement. It's the pat on the back, the high five, the, like, you get dessert, the kiss, the hug. You know, kids love praise. We all do. So you have to think about, you know, why are they procrastinating? Some people, why do they want to stop it? You know, what's in it for me? What's the intrinsic motivation for me to stop that? So some people just think about their sense of self-pride. Some gamify it. They make it like an internal bet. So talking to kids, you have to really figure out, what's that thing? Is it like you want to feel good? You want something, you want $5, you want 5 cookies, you want to maybe you just want to get your parents off your back. We have to figure out what that switch is. And I like people to, when they've done something that's as they're doing habit formation, when it's not pleasant, that's when you give yourself a break, a snack, you take a walk. I'm going to wait till I read these 10 pages, and then I'm going to, make that phone call to my friend or FaceTime somebody. So rewards help us override those old habits and create something new our brain wants. We want to crave that new thing. Once your brain expects the reward, once your kids' brains expect the reward, they know the rewiring process has started to happen. And then, honestly, there has to be this kind of cognitive part, the belief. Perhaps the most critical aspect of changing a habit is to get people to believe they can do it. I can't do that. I've tried, I can't do it. You have to be a believer, especially when things are stressful and the natural inclination is to revert back to old habits. So I like when kids of all ages have an accountability partner. Your friend's going to keep you honest, or who in your world is going to that you're okay keeping you accountable. When I used to work even with adults with ADHD, I'm like, who's your friend? Sometimes I would get them to find another person with ADHD, and we're going to share calendars and we're going to remind each other of stuff. We're going to hold each other accountable. This is behaviorism 101, but it's so elegant and simple how we get people to change their behaviors. Insight's really nice. Change is better. Our kids, when they're having a problem, I'm a middle-aged Jewish guy from, the Upper East Side of New York. I'll do psychoanalysis all day. Kids need change. They don't want to just talk about it. They want to see things change in their life. Next slide. We got to teach them how to set goals. If that was easy, January 2nd, we'd all be at the gym, losing weight, not smoking. People are pretty good at the what. It has to be reasonable. You can't say, I want to make the middle school basketball team is different than I need to play for the Knicks. But a lot of people forget the objective, the how. What are the steps we need to take? And the part I rarely see happen, which sports psychologists know so well, is why. Where's the intrinsic motivation? Why do you want it? I hate learning trigonometry, but why do I need to learn? Because I want to go to college, or I want to, I want to get through the class, or I want my, I want to feel good about myself, or I want my parents to stop getting the tutor that I hate. Whatever it is, we got to figure out what that reward is. We're always got to think about what the reinforcer is, not just the plan. Next slide. This is simple, but it's believe it or not, from my experience, it's a really important thing for us to know and be able to adapt to our kids. So we often do all sorts of rationalizing to avoid doing what we want to avoid. Anxiety is synonymous with avoidance. We create our own fantasy world to convince ourselves that the big project can be done last minute. Oh, how many kids do we know? Oh, I'll do it in the morning. I'll do it in lunch. I'll do it in break. That's a slippery slope. So we know from research that is the product that triggers the pain centers of our brain. which in turn causes avoidance or procrastination. So, marathon runners get this. They don't run 27 miles, they run 1 mile 27 times. So we want people to focus actually on the mundane, non-painful little units. My son, who obviously was dyslexic and hated reading, I would say, just read for 5 minutes. I can do that. And then 5 minutes, all of a sudden, the pain center was less activated. I can do another 5 minutes. I can do another 5 minutes. I can do it. Some people more time. Some people are more, quantity, 5 pages versus 5 minutes. But we want to focus on the outcome, on the stages, not the outcome. What do you need to do to get it done? It should be really autopilot processes that get us to do difficult things. So again, the goal is to avoid focusing on the outcome, first building those sort of processes. Simply relax into the sort of flow of your work versus obsessing about the outcome. We see all our kids do it, the big test, even applying to college, whatever it is at any age, we got to break it down and make it less painful. Next slide. Even breaks. This is an easy sell for kids. People spend too much time, and again, it depends on the age. A 7-year-old, usually the shift happens by age. So like if you're teaching 15-year-olds, you need to shift a class every 15 minutes. We're going to go from, having discussion to working on this worksheet. But every 45 minutes or an hour, people need to take a break because look at what it passively does to recall. Just simply taking strategic breaks, not an hour on, an hour off, which some kids want to do, but just by taking breaks, allowing ourselves to regroup and have that energy is such a simple, easy way. You actually get more done. You take that break and you get your snack, you take care of your life, you call your mom, whatever. Really increases recall, which is really, really important. When people say they study for 4 hours straight, I say that's not very smart. Next slide. And this is just taking a page out of good old cognitive behavioral therapy, which is our cognitions, our thoughts, so much impact how we feel, and how we feel impacts how we behave. If I feel terrible, I don't want to do a certain thing. So we really want to listen to what our kids are saying. Are they having that very negative self-talk that's really kind of like pointing a finger, that inner critic? I have to, I choose to, I should. It would be better. Let's make it a preference, not a demand. It's so big, I could break it down into steps. So just reframing cognitions, all of a sudden people feel better. They're less uptight, they're less sort of strained, and all of a sudden they can function better. They're able to do that test. And this you can do with any kid of any age, but when the shoulds, the have tos, the musts, all those sort of absolute kind of thoughts, that's where we want to soften that up so that when people have more of a preferential mindset than an absolute one, they're really able to function a lot better. These are just some of my hit parade of procrastination busters, my top hits. But again, working on either time or task, breaking things up. Now you understand why. Sort of like not getting that pain center sort of avoidance to get us. We want to just tolerate the pain enough so that it subsides, so that we can get into things. And worst first. I think Mark Twain said something like, if you can eat your frogs first thing in the day, then everything else gets easy. I'm paraphrasing. But some people avoid so much that painful first thing. They hate doing whatever that project or homework is, that they avoid everything else. If you can get that done, everything else tends to follow. Not with every kid, but sometimes that works. Again, self-reward. We want to be good behaviorists. We want to reinforce what we want and not reinforce differential reinforcement. We want to like phase out what we don't want our kids to do and reinforce what we do. So, oh, here it is. Here's the quote. If the first thing you do in the morning is eat a live frog, you can go through the rest of the day knowing the worst is behind you. I hope he was being, metaphorical when he said that. So that's the end. I want to give everybody a little time if they want for questions.
Thank you so much. That was very informative. And I know you have a tremendous amount to share, and we only gave you a short window to do so. So we appreciate that you got through all that. If people have questions, you can go ahead and start to put them in the chat. One question already is for the middle schoolers, the high schoolers who have this heavy workload, and you're then asking them after they finally finish their homework, review your notes from today and from yesterday for 5 minutes for social studies, if that's your hardest subject. How do you sell that when they're finally done?
Well, one of the things I found, certainly with the middle and high school kids, is first of all, I give them the fantasy image, and I say, what would it mean if you remembered 4 times the amount of stuff? Oh, I'd be really smart. I said, what? I said, by the way, if you do this, you're going to have a lot more free time. And I'll say something like, let's say you had another hour every day to do anything you wanted. That's legal. I learned that the wrong way. What would you do? And all of a sudden you get them to sort of visualize and fantasize almost about, wow, kids with poor time management, poor executive functioning tend to be very stressed out and have time for nothing. I can't do anything. And really what gets cut out are the things that they love, that make them feel good, that are meaningful. So we try to do a little of that sort of what we call in psychology motivational interviewing. But the other thing I'll say is like, look, this is 5 minutes. What's so much? Let's figure out when you're going to use that 5 minutes. And some kids are like, you know what? I'll do it during the commercial, or I'll do it while I'm waiting for the bus. Like, I'm telling you, I'm not taking up more of your time. Let's find those natural cracks in your day. Let's fill them. It's going to take no time away. And once you get them to do it, and they start feeling better, they're less stressed, they have more time, their performance is better. Then you go from that sort of extrinsic motivation to convince them to the intrinsic motivation, which is that they feel good and it's self-perpetuating. So that's the job. We have to sell them. We have to sell them on it.
It's a great idea. Questions? Any questions that people have? Okay, one other question. So if you have a child who needs some executive function support, how do you get them on board if they're thinking they're fine, but they could use some extra help?
I can only tell you what I've learned, generally speaking, and I can tell you what tends to go wrong. And I'd be interested to know, Erica, what your tutors say. So first of all, what tends to happen is for any age kid is that people kind of wait till things are on fire. So all of a sudden it's 3 months into school. Oh my God, we need an executive functioning coach. When you get a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old and they are already on fire, to convince them to do things differently is extremely hard. It really is. I like to find a natural break, like another semester or something. So for step one is start it early, start it like right now before things get dicey, because it's really a hard sell. The other thing I find that goes wrong is parents will have, I'm gonna throw a lot of resources at this. I'm gonna get a superstar executive functioning coach. I'm gonna get 16 tutors. And we have to be careful because executive functioning coach's job is to teach you how to fish so you can eat, infinitely. A tutor's job is to give you a fish so you can eat today. So we got to be careful how we put those things together. They tend to cancel out. That's a really important thing. But when I meet a kid who's they know they're in pain. They know things aren't going well. They're scared. They're upset. They're really angry. And I say something like, look, your parents brought you here. You didn't bring yourself here. You've got to decide if you want to bring yourself back here. Don't tell me now. Here's my number. Here's my card. Call me later, or tell your parents. But I know if you walk back through that door, or virtually or physically, however we do it these days, you're going to do great and you're motivated. And it just shifts the balance to their ownership. I have done this for a long time. In 20 plus years doing that, again, that's motivational interviewing, which is I've made it your decision, not mine. But I've also sort of painted a picture of that your life is going to get better. You're going to be in less pain, but I'm not making you do it. We impose way too much on our kids so they don't buy in. Doing that, they've almost all come back and said, okay, I'm ready to do it. So again, we have to enroll them. We have to give them the locus of control. Even
Very
if sometimes that's artifice, we have to do it.
So one other question, I'm being mindful of time. I know it's getting late. Someone who has a kindergartner interested in how do you not be rigid, but impose structure? So if you want to have bedtime, let's say, be consistent and early on school days, how do you impose structure without becoming rigid?
You know, I think people give rigid a bad name, first of all. So the concept of behaviorism is not, you never meet, but you have to be what I like to call a benevolent manager. You're kind, but you're also extremely semantically precise, meaning if I'm imposing structure and we're going to have a 8 o'clock bedtime, the way I say it is going to be the exact same way every time. When I'm going to do it, how I'm going to do it. We need to be semantically very consistent. But we also want to be, I mean, this is going to sound weird, but we almost want to be a little neutral. When I used to do that to my kids, I was like a mannequin. I was like, you could not read, but I was sort of inscrutable because, again, I don't want to reinforce it by looking angry or looking like I'm really nervous about it. That really sends the wrong reinforcement signals. So the more, again, you want to preview with kids, reminder. So I remind you every day right after dinner at 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock's our bedtime. You know, previewing that, you know, kids, especially with executive functioning stuff, you need to preview. You might need to make a visual so they can see it. Again, every kid has their different level of signal detection. Kids who need more, if they're not doing it, you have to say to yourself, am I being consistent? Is the signal loud enough? If it's not, how do I make that signal louder? But don't be worried. Being rigid is being actually a good parent. Kids regulate and follow things when you're actually a bit rigid. That's it. You know, I work with very, very complex kids, and it's amazing the teachers who are good benevolent managers, they are rigid but kind. Kids love them because they feel better around them. They regulate. So be kind and rigid. They're not mutually exclusive. They can be paired together. That's how you, with young kids who are kindergarten, you have to be absolutely militant, but kind, but be militant. I sucked at it, by the way. My wife was much better at it than I was.
It's a delicate balance and tightrope to be walking, for sure.
It is, but remember, people feel better, young kids at that age feel so much better with predictability and structure, especially in a world that was starting to get weird. Mom and dad are working at home a lot. Things are like they can feed into that. So the more routine and semantically consistent you are, but be a little rigid. That's, if you're not being a little rigid, you're not going to do it right. You're a good parent. You love your kids. They know that, but really manage clearly.
Okay. Thank you.
Not hard, just difficult for people to follow through on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it looks like we are just about at time. So I want to sincerely thank Dr. Flamenbaum for his tremendously helpful guidance. And for those of you who joined late, I just wanted to remind parents that Smart City Tutors is happy to provide a discount on executive function tutoring sessions. So I put my email in the chat, my first and last name, Erica Papier at smartcitykids.com. So if you're interested in executive function tutor sessions, you can email me. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening. Maybe you can even try some of the new things you learned tonight. And thank you so much for coming.